2025 NCAA men's basketball tournament has been full of no. This March Madness, a lot of the teams you expect to go far actually are. This year's Final Four will feature most of the best in the bunch. In the current age of easy transfer and NIL funds, it seems the better players always find their way to the bigger programs quickly, which might be killing the mid-major and Cinderella runs as we speak. With no big darlings of the tournament in 2025, we'll have to look back at the most ridiculous Final Four runs you won't see again. The 78-79 Penn Quakers made history as one of the great Cinderella stories in tournament history. They were members of the Ivy League and still are. That Penn was not expected to compete with the top programs in the country, yet under head coach Bob Weinhauer, the Quakers shocked the nation by getting to the Final Four. They entered the season as one of the Ivy League's stronger teams, and they proved their dominance, finishing with a 21-5 overall record and a 13-1 conference record, which secured the Ivy League championship for them. There was actually no conference tournament in the Ivy League at the time, so the Quakers earned an automatic bid to the tournament. Tony Price was the Ivy League Player of the Year and the leader of the team, but you had key contributors like Tim Smith, James Booney Salters, and Matt White. Their strong defense really helped lift the team. Penn came into the tournament as a number 9 seed in the East region, meaning expectations were a little bit low for the team, but the Quakers defied odds quickly. In the first round, Penn edged out Iona in a hard-fought battle to advance, and in the second round, they took down the 1 seed North Carolina 72-71 in what was one of the biggest upsets of the tournament, and Penn was able to move on from that big second round matchup. Against Syracuse, the Penn Quakers did even better, winning 84-76, and then they would defeat another Cinderella at number 10 St. John's by 2 points to secure their spot in the Final Four with an Elite 8 win. They were the first Ivy League to do so since Princeton had done it back in 1965. Penn would lose in the national semifinals when Magic Johnson and Michigan State took them down. The Spartans, led by Johnson and Greg Kelser, overwhelmed the Quakers 101-67, bringing the dream to a close. Michigan State, of course, would go on to win the national championship over Larry Bird's Indiana State team in what started the awesome battles between Johnson and Bird. The 2022-23 Florida Atlantic Owls men's basketball team made history with an incredible season that culminated in their first ever Final Four. With head coach Dusty May leading the team, the Owls transformed from an overlooked mid-major into one of the most exciting teams in that college basketball run that year, proving they could compete with the nation's best. They entered the season with somewhat average expectations, but really blew those out the door. The Owls finished with a 31-3 regular season record and went 18-2 in conference play, securing the regular season championship in their conference. The Owls had a pretty balanced attack featuring John L. Davis, Elijah Martin, Vladislav Golden, and Nick Boyd. With good playmaking, strong defense, and three-point shooting, the FAU Owls were able to get into the AP Top 25 for the first time in program history. FAU took this momentum into the Conference USA tournament when they beat Western Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, and UAB to win the conference championship. They then secured an automatic bid to the tournament, and they were given the number 9 seed in the East. FAU beat Memphis by just 1 in the round of 64 thanks to Nick Boyd with a last-second layup that got him to the next round. In the round of 32, the number 16 team Farley Dickinson was taken down by FAU. Dickinson, of course, with their 1 win in the first round, really having a little bit of a Cinderella story of their own. In the Sweet 16, the Owls took down number 4 Tennessee thanks to their toughness and clutch shooting, which held Tennessee to just 55. And in the Elite 8, Kansas State lost by 3 to this Owls team. A battle-tested FAU squad held off Kansas State, and they got into the Final Four. But Lamont Butler, in the face of the Houstonites in attendance, beat FAU in the Final Four as he rose up, hit the buzzer-beating jump shot, and won the game 72-71, forever dismissing the FAU run. But despite that, the Owls will go down as one of the better Cinderella teams in NCAA history, and the 35-win season is the best in program history. The 17-18 Loyola Chicago Ramblers really got a national attention as quite the story in the NCAA tournament, with head coach Porter Moser inspiring many of those around the country with the beloved Sister Jean also by his side. The Ramblers shocked the nation by advancing to their first Final Four since 1963. As members of the Missouri Valley Conference, the Ramblers entered the season with modest expectations, but quickly proved to be a pretty big force in mid-major basketball. Loyola Chicago finished the regular season with a 25-5 record through 30 games and went 15-3 in Missouri Valley Conference play. This gave them the conference regular season title. A big moment for the team is when they defeated number 5 Florida from the SEC on the road in Gainesville, which showed they could play with the big dogs. Clayton Custer, the MVC Player of the Year, teamed up with Dante Ingram, Marquise Towns, and Cameron Krutwig, and in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, Loyola Chicago dominated the competition, defeating Northern Iowa, Bradley, and Illinois State to win the tournament title. There, they were given an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament, and they were given the 11th seed in the South region. The tournament was really where Loyola Chicago turned it on. In the round of 64, Loyola Chicago defeated number 6 Miami by 2 thanks to Dante Ingram's buzzer-beating three-pointer, which sent the Ramblers to the next round. In the round of 32, they then took down another SEC opponent, this time number 3 Tennessee by just 1. Clayton Custer with the game-winning jumper with seconds left got them another thrilling win. And in the Sweet 16, when they played number 7 Nevada, Marquise Towns hit a clutch 3 to seal yet another one-possession, one-point win. The Ramblers really didn't blow anybody out until they played number 9 Kansas State, which was their most dominant performance, where they pretty much controlled from start to finish, getting them to the Final Four. Loyola Chicago would lose to Michigan 69-57 in the national semifinals, but their Cinderella story remains maybe the most well-known in the last decade and one of the most well-known of all time, particularly with the impact of Sister Jean and the amount of attention that got throughout the run. With Sister Jean, that also revived some memories of the 1963 national championship team that Loyola Chicago had. Virginia Commonwealth is hardly mentioned as a school, but as a mid-major in basketball, they tend to do pretty well. Although there was one year in 2010 and 11, nobody expected them to get as far in the tournament as they did. VCU actually had to get through the first 4 of the tournament before getting to the final 4, meaning they had an extra game to go down, but they were still able to get it done. Competing in the Colonial Athletic Association, the VCU Rams finished the regular season with a 21-10 record and only went 12-6 in conference play. They were a solid team, but did not win the regular season conference title, as George Mason and Old Dominion had those honors. In the conference tournament, the Rams made a run to the championship game and defeated Drexel and number 1 seed George Mason before falling to Old Dominion in a close 5-point loss. At this point, VCU was put on the tournament bubble, and many believe they may have missed out on an at-large bid. However, the selection committee awarded them one of the final spots, placing them in the first 4 and as an 11th seed. And that might have been a mistake to anyone that didn't want to see this team in there, as the Rams went on an unprecedented run, winning 5 straight games to reach the Final Four, and they knocked off a lot of good opponents along the way. First, they took down number 11 USC with a 13-point win. With a good defensive performance, they were moved on to the actual round of 64. The Rams overwhelmed the Hoyas with their signature havoc defense and 3-point shooting in the round of 64. Against the Boilermakers of Purdue, the number 3 seed, VCU's offense stepped up with 94 points, which was their tournament high, putting them in the Sweet 16. Virginia Commonwealth then defeated number 10 Florida State out of the ACC in an overtime thriller, where they were able to win by 1 and get to the Elite 8. And the biggest one of them all, number 1 Kansas, going down to Virginia Commonwealth, were 10 seeds behind them. The Jayhawks were stunned and were heavily favored, but would not be going to the Final Four as the Rams took their spot there. In Houston, you had a mid-major powerhouse battle, but VCU would fall short to Butler 70-62, ending the dream season, but the journey still remains as one of the more inspiring runs in NCAA history, particularly with that extra game in the first 4. Nobody expected this team to get where they ended up going, and it was really a run that put the country on notice. They were also a team not to get blown out in that Final Four despite getting there, which just proved how competitive they were through and through each game, and were not lucky to advance to each round. And perhaps the Cinderella of Cinderellas, the 2005-2006 George Mason Patriots did not seem like they were going to the Final Four, and yet stunned everybody in America to get there. Under head coach Jim Larrañaga, the Patriots were able to advance beyond expectations and did somewhat show that mid-major programs could potentially compete with the nation's elite and win a championship. George Mason did pretty well in the regular season. A member of the Colonial Athletic Association, they would have moderate expectations, but quickly turned into a pretty good conference powerhouse that year. The Patriots finished the regular season with an impressive 23-7 record and then went 15-3 in conference play, earning a share of the regular season title. They had good scoring balance and disciplined play, plus a tough defense, making them a pretty formidable opponent to go on a tournament run. Yet, the team would actually lose 58-49 to Hofstra in the CAA tournament semifinals, leaving them in a little bit of jeopardy to even make the tournament. But the committee decided they would be good enough with wins over those like Wichita State and a dominance conference record record, they were put in an at-large bid and an 11 seed in the Washington, D.C. region. Some believe that Hofstra actually should have been in for George Mason, but the Patriots would prove the doubters wrong very quickly. Starting an awesome run to Indianapolis, George Mason took down number 6 Michigan State by 10, led by Tony Skinn, John Lewis, and Lamar Butler. The Patriots stunned the Spartans, which was a team that many figured might get back to the Final Four despite being the 6th seed. They had made it the previous, which was a team that many expected maybe to get back to the Final Four or make a deep run, as they were able to get there last season, and people still had high hopes that they could maybe pull off a Cinderella run of their own and win the whole thing. In the next round, the team took down number 3 North Carolina, the big basketball powerhouse of the ACC. They were the defending national champions, but were taken down by George Mason because of that relentless defense and clutch shooting. In the Sweet 16 against Wichita State, George Mason beat their prior foes by 8 and went on to the Elite 8, where in another thrilling overtime game and one of the greater upsets in NCAA history, George Mason takes down number 1 UConn. The heavily favored Huskies go down in overtime, which put them into the Final Four. But there they would run into the buzzsaw that was the Florida Gators, the national champion that year. They would lose by 15, ending the magical run. However, George Mason, with the upsets against the 1 and 3 seeds, taking down the Big East, the ACC, and now the Big Ten, they had already solidified their place in NCAA tournament lore. And it's off that run that many modern Cinderella runs like Loyola Chicago, like VCU, like FAU, and other honorable mentions, because of the George Mason effort, they paved the way for them. These are just some of the teams you might not have remembered made the Final Four. Drop some comments and a like down below if you have any thoughts. Feel free to subscribe if you like content like this. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video.